And this evening, afternoon, evening, beautifully bright out. We're so honored to have Madhulika Sikka here, a veteran broadcast journalist who has worked with ABC and NPR News, among many others. In fact, for those who've sort of already dipped into the book, Breast Cancer Alphabet, you'll recall that Madhulika was waiting outside the Oval Office to tape an interview with President Obama at the beginning of the book, in fact, for NPR. And at the same moment was also waiting for some very personal news, a call from her doctor about the results of a biopsy. And she's now written a Breast Cancer Alphabet, less a memoir and more a candid, empathetic, and real guide to life before, during, and after breast cancer. As Tina Brown said, it's a remarkably insightful and sensitive guide to making the best of the worst, all delivered with Madhulika's wit and vital energy. It touches on everything from sex to drugs to fashion advice, and it offers personal anecdotes packed with really practical advice, not the least of which, I think, must be a very freeing sentiment, which is sometimes it just sucks, and it's okay to say it just sucks sometimes. So I won't spend any more time paraphrasing. I just do want to add that it's been my pleasure in the years I've gotten a chance to work with Madhulika. She's always such an intelligent and warm person, and I'm just so pleased to welcome her to Politics and Prose. So, Madhulika.
Thanks, Lena. Okay, I have to say this is a very weird experience for me because Politics and Prose is my bookstore, and I've come here to many, many events with authors, never imagining that I would be here doing an author event. So, it's a little crazy. Thank you to Politics and Prose for having me here. It is a great bookstore, and I hope you're all members, and if you're not, you should be. I come from the world of public radio, and I understand the importance of membership. So if you're not a member, go and become one. It is really just a vital institution in our city, and we are very fortunate to have it. I was just reminiscing with Lena how my kids used to sit in the cubby downstairs in the kids section, and they're way past the cubby stage now, but we still love to come here. So I'm going to read a couple of segments of the book. As you can tell, it's 26 short essays. It's an alphabet about different things that struck me during my treatment. And then I am happy to take questions. So here goes. I'm going to start with the introduction. There is a hushed reverence in the waiting area outside the Oval Office. After all those years of the West Wing, one might think there would be a bustle of activity, a swirl of smart, earnest people walking and talking at the same time. Perhaps I would catch snippets of conversation about the budgets and bills, policies and politicians. It's not like that. My NPR colleagues and I were there to interview President Obama, and we waited quietly with a stenographer and the Secret Service. No one else came by. Despite my years of journalism in Washington, it would be my first time in the Oval Office. It was December 2010, and the White House was beautifully decked out for the holidays. It should have been an exciting moment, but the only thing I could concentrate on was my cell phone. 4 days earlier, I had undergone a needle biopsy on a suspicious mass in my left breast, found after a routine mammogram. I was waiting for my internist to call with the results. In my heart, I knew it would not be good. Something in the radiologist's manner gave me a clue. As she prepared for the biopsy, I'd tried to break the ice. Maybe it's just a blocked duct, I'd said jokingly. She didn't laugh or even crack a smile. Not good, I thought. This was also the week when Elizabeth Edwards died after having been diagnosed with breast cancer just 6 years prior. The wife of the one-time presidential and vice presidential candidate John Edwards, she had revealed her diagnosis a day after the 2004 presidential election, in which her husband and his presidential running mate, John Kerry, lost. Her cancer returned in 2007 during her husband's bid for the presidency. She ultimately weathered the twin challenges of breast cancer and her husband's infidelity with grace and poise. I'd pored over all the reporting about her in the days since my biopsy. Of course, this was part of my job as a journalist, but it took on greater meaning for me as I awaited the results of my biopsy. Thoughts of her passing went through my mind as I paced nervously and made small talk with my colleagues. On a nearby table, there was a digital photo frame cycling through images of the president. For some reason, I kept waiting for the photo of then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. I've totally screwed that up, sorry. And President Obama at Ray's Hellburger, the renowned hamburger joint in nearby Arlington, Virginia. Why was I so taken with that picture? Maybe it was because I'd eaten there myself with my husband and 2 daughters, and I remembered how we'd laughed at the contrivance in this photo. The presidents of 2 superpowers in shirt sleeves, just enjoying a burger like any old Joe. I felt my phone buzz and saw the caller ID was blocked. I didn't answer. This was not a conversation I could have. Not here, not now, waiting to be called into the Oval Office at any moment. All I remember about my entrance into the Oval Office was that the room seemed much smaller than in the movies. The Christmas tree was also surprisingly understated in its decorations. Was the furniture more shabby chic than stately home? Couldn't tell you. The new rug? No idea. I can tell you that the president looked older than I had imagined. 20 minutes after we had entered the Oval Office, we were done. Extending the Bush tax cuts, the START treaty, overhauling the tax code, the topics raised in the conversation whizzed by in a blur. The president stepped out to the outer office and donned his coat and scarf before heading off to light the national Christmas tree. We gathered our equipment and headed to the NPR filing booth, a tiny closet located underneath the press briefing room, formerly a swimming pool, to file a quick clip of the interview with the president for the top-of-the-hour newscast. I ducked out of our booth to check my voicemail. One thing to know about the filing area under the press briefing room is that cell reception is quite bad. I had to wander around to find the place where my phone would actually work. Anxious and pessimistic, I listened and breathed a sigh of relief. The call was from my middle school daughter's teacher, apprising me of something that had happened at school that day. Normally, I might have been concerned about a call from school, but given that what I was anticipating, this was welcome and not worrying news. I returned to the filing booth where we plotted out what we would be doing for the next news cycle, what clip we could play later in the evening and the next morning's show. My job as executive producer of Morning Edition, NPR's flagship show, which reaches some 6 million listeners a day, was all about decisions, big and small. How would we use the president's interview with host Steve Inskeep throughout the broadcast? Was there a role for our White House correspondent, Scott Horsley? What clip would we put out in advance of the morning's broadcast and release to the press? I left my colleague Steve and Scott to structure an outline for our story and wandered back upstairs to the press briefing room. You know this room, the one that has the blue curtains with the White House logo and the press secretary's podium. It is the site of the daily press briefing. Here you get a cell signal. I noticed a fresh voicemail. It was my doctor asking me to have her paged. The moment of reckoning had arrived. I needed some privacy for this conversation, so I stepped outside into the crisp, cold, early evening air as I waited for the hospital operator to track her down. There was a construction site right by the briefing room, a massive hole with big pipes sticking out. It might as well have swallowed me up. My head had been full of the president's interview, and now my doctor was delivering the most devastating news I had ever had in my life. You have breast cancer. That's part of the introduction, and I feel it is my obligation to defend my internist here because so many people said, how could you learn about this on the telephone? We had actually agreed that she would find the results. All my doctors were at Georgetown, and I didn't want to be told by an anonymous radiologist who I didn't know what the results were, and my internist would have access to it. And we knew by Thursday afternoon she would get the results. So she did call me because we had agreed, and as she was telling me, she said, oh, this is the thing they tell you not to do, to talk to patients on the phone about a diagnosis like this. But she said, I knew it would be worse for me to just say, come and see me in the morning. So I am very glad that she was able to do that. So I defend her completely. And yes, you probably should get it face to face. But I was fortunate enough to have a doctor who could do that for me. And the best news was that not only could she tell me the diagnosis, but she also had already arranged for me to have an appointment with a surgeon. So I had a little bit of an idea of what I would be doing in a couple of days. So I've picked a couple of letters to read. The first one is C for Cancerland. I've been fortunate enough to travel a lot. In fact, my husband and I have been to some amazing places around the world, and there are some places we've wanted to revisit but haven't gotten to yet. However, there was one place that we had no intention of ever going back to. In 2000, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and we entered Cancerland. He went through successful treatment, and we became visitors emeriti, always somehow associated with Cancerland, but only around the edges. Sadly, in 2010, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and we were back, both feet firmly planted in Cancerland. I'm one of those anal types who like to plan for a trip. Maybe it's the broadcast producer in me. Before going to a new place, I make folders full of travel articles, restaurant reviews, notes on hidden gems to visit that I'd found out about from friends and acquaintances. I also like to have some sense of a schedule, to know where I'm landing, where I'm staying, what to see, and how long my trip is going to be. Well, here's the thing about Cancerland. 1 minute, you're minding your own business, living your humdrum life, and the next minute, you are thrust into this strange land of surgeries and drugs and side effects and pain and anxiety, and you didn't even have a minute to prepare for it. It's like stumbling through the wardrobe into another world. You're about to embark on a mysterious trip, and you don't know where it is going to end. You receive no notice, no clear map, and no schedule. Usually, when you plan for a trip for yourself, you have a sense of who your fellow travelers might be. When you're backpacking in the mountains, they will be the healthy, active types. Exotic locales, not much visited yet, will have intrepid, adventurous types. You know what I mean. You feel you can identify with at least some of your traveling companions. The thing about your fellow travelers in Cancerland is that they can be anyone. Cancer offers absolutely no barrier to entry. Young, old, rich, poor, male, female, white, black, athletic, sedentary. Cancerland is not the slightest bit discerning about whom it will allow to visit. The only criteria? Some rogue cells running around your body. That is your passport, visa, and ticket. There are some things worth knowing about Cancerland. The first thing is that it is an incredibly busy place, and you will be astounded by how many people are there. The place where you get the best sense of that is the chemotherapy infusion unit. Being there is like going to a public beach on the hottest day of the year. Patients spewed out of the waiting room into the corridors whenever I arrived there. And even though I had an appointment, there was the wait. Always the wait. Because demand so far exceeded supply. It's a little like being double booked, except you're waiting for the next free recliner or bed so that your day-long session of poison pumping can start. At all my visits to the chemotherapy infusion unit, it was standing room only. I half expected to hear an announcement like at a train station. Please stand clear of the doors, another train is following shortly. But there are some stops in Cancerland where you are treated like those people who can boast of fast-track access, where you don't have to wait with the hoi polloi, but instead just get ushered in ahead of everyone else. When you are undergoing treatment, you get your blood tested a lot. Not for me, the long wait in the main lab at the hospital full of people with other ailments. There was a secret lab just for those of us in Cancerland, in and out in 15 minutes every week. I hope you will not have to go to the emergency room during your treatment. I sadly did. When you're really sick, the idea of an endless wait to be seen makes you feel worse. Well, not in Cancerland. I found myself being wheeled in immediately. Make way, chemo patient coming through. Small comforts, I know, but hey, you take what you can get. Here's another thing to know about Cancerland. The people who are your trip planners, the doctors, have more than likely not visited themselves. They are experts, of course, and they've packed off so many people to Cancerland that they talk a good game, almost like they know what it's really like. They're full of knowledge and tips, things they've learned from visitors who report back, but they haven't actually experienced it the way you and their other patients will. The nurses are more like hotel concierges. They'll tell you what to expect on your visit and what to look out for and what to avoid, but they've probably not been there themselves either. Even the most experienced of the healthcare professionals don't know what it is like to feel as tired as you will. See, X is for exhaustion. I know that's a cheat, but X is for exhaustion. During chemotherapy, or how bloated you will feel on steroids, or the extent to which a mastectomy really hurts. This is precisely why it is worth seeking out the counsel of others who've been to Cancerland, so that they can share some of their experiences with you. You'll find it's like entering a secret society. You might have known someone who has had breast cancer treatment, and you might have thought that you sort of understood what she was going through. But it is not until you yourself are diagnosed that you realize there was so much you could not possibly know from the outside. Only when you're in the club yourself are the full details of what to expect shared. What your friends share will not be a complete map to Cancerland because everyone's map is unique, but it gives you the broad contours of this place that once you enter, you never really leave. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to F. It's not Ola Downer. F is for fashion accessories. You've been diagnosed with a terrible disease that for previous generations was almost always a death sentence. So it may seem a little frivolous to devote a whole section to fashion, most especially fashion accessories. But frankly, not enough attention is paid to fashion accessories at the best of times, and this is a moment when they come in useful. CL is for looks. If you undergo chemotherapy, you will soon come to terms with the fact that you are bald. CH is for hair. Then you will spend an inordinate amount of time figuring out how to cover your head up. My friend Leslie calls herself a nostalgist. In her book, Let's Bring Back, she pines for the style and panache of times gone by. Things like handwritten thank you notes, roll-top desks, and tennis whites. You won't be surprised to hear that she has a lot of time for head coverings of all sorts. Hats, headscarves, and turbans, boaters, berets, and safari hats. The world she evokes harkens back to a time of elegance and elan. Here was a bright side. I could use this opportunity to become as stylish and perhaps as divine as many of the heroines of yesteryear. Chemo headwear is big business. My chemo started in the dead of winter and continued into the summer, so I got to go through some seasons during my treatment. I had a lot of knitted caps, courtesy of the hospital volunteers, and even my own knitting. I actually needed them, especially at night, because I had no idea my head would get cold. I didn't expect that. But most of the time, I looked like a lumberjack. Maybe it had something to do with the open front plaid shirts I was wearing post-mastectomy, or I looked like a cat burglar. So is there an elegant option? Turbans seemed to me to be the way to go. Elizabeth Taylor died while I was undergoing treatment. She, of course, had had a brain tumor removed years ago, and her obituaries were an opportunity to remind us all how gorgeous she looked, bald, with painted eyebrows during her treatment. Try as I might, I knew I wasn't going to look like Liz Taylor. However, look online and you'll find pictures of her looking stunning in a turban during the 1960s. Sophia Loren and Lena Horne, too, carrying off their turbans with grace and glamour. Go back further and find all those brass-balled dames of the 1930s. Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, Rosalind Russell. They could carry off the turban look without seeming injured or sick or just plain ridiculous. Check out some fashion magazines from the period, and you'll find you can't think of anything more ladylike and chic than a turban on your head, preferably with a large jewel smack in the middle of the front folds and a fox fur around your neck. Unfortunately, plain ridiculous was how it looked on me. I don't know what it was. Maybe you need a long neck, a larger forehead, or maybe you just needed to see yourself in black and white. "Mom, you look like a chemo patient," was the resounding opinion of my teenage daughters when I tried to go with the ready-made turban look. Don't worry, if the turban is not for you, you will not lack for inspiration. Flapper caps, floppy hats, peasant scarves, baseball hats, cloches, straw boaters, and of course, a wig. Scarves were my next option. I learned a few things about scarves. Silk slips off your head, so avoid silk scarves if you don't want to spend the whole time touching your head to make sure that your baldness is not peeking through. Scarves that are too big and have too much fabric will bunch at the nape of your neck, if that is where you have the knot, and they will slip off too. Bandana-sized scarves in thin cotton seem to work for me, tied in the back, not the front, unless you're going off to the Rosie the Riveter look. Here's another mystery about the whole covering up the baldness thing. I had black hair, never colored it, just stuck with my black hair regardless of what I was wearing. Suddenly it became imperative that my headscarves coordinate with my clothes. I had to get a peach-colored scarf to go with my spring clothes, navy for the overcast days, gray to look more businesslike, flowery to look more relaxed. Why was I compelled to do this? Was it really necessary that I be all matchy-matchy from head to toe? There was a time in America when hats weren't just for church. Hats were literally the crowning glory. Bonnets to wide brims, pillboxes to cloches. A lady always wore a hat. I wasn't doing so well with the hats, so scarves were for me. But if you can't figure out the right head covering for you, bald may be the way to go, especially when it's hot. I found that what really helped me with the uncovered head were earrings. Big, bold, interesting earrings. When people see you bald for the first time, they're a little taken aback, so earrings give them something to focus on. You have license to go a little wild, and you are helping the people around you, giving them something to comment on beyond your naked head. That's my rationale, and I'm sticking to it. Hoops, sparkles, stock, shiny, just have at it. You'll feel a whole lot better. Okay, I'm going to do one more. G is for guilt. So here are some things that might have caused my breast cancer. Being a woman, guilty. Getting older, guilty. Genetic inheritance, not guilty. Periods before the age of 12, guilty. Overweight before menopause, guilty. First child after the age of 30, guilty. Current or recent use of birth control pills, guilty. Large breasts, not guilty. Dense breasts, not guilty. Not breastfeeding, partially guilty. Breastfed for only 3 months. Not exercising regularly, guilty. Not having lots of children, guilty. Excessive alcohol use, not guilty. You get the point. You've been diagnosed with a horrible, possibly deadly disease. You will go through a wretched regimen of treatment, and your body will be temporarily wrecked as you do. The embodiment of your femininity, the breast, is the treacherous villain in this drama, and you are the one who feels guilty. How can this be? Well, this must have been my fault, right? Looking at that list, I tend to focus on the things that were in my control. Weight, birth control pills, breastfeeding, exercise, childbearing. Of course, I must have done something wrong to cause this, and all I can feel is guilty. With the passage of time, you realize this guilt is almost irrational, but that is not what it feels like in the moment. I think that is because not only do you feel guilty that you have this disease you might have been able to prevent, not true, but you also start to feel guilty because of what this is doing to the people around you. You feel guilty that your life at home, which you might have been holding together with duct tape and chewing gum, if truth be told, is going to be severely disrupted by the fact that you have this disease. Your family has to adjust to a new you, a sometimes needy you, a you that isn't really you, but a vessel for this disease at this moment. You feel guilty about how this might disrupt things for people around you outside your family. For me, it was the strain put on my colleagues who were picking up my slack. They couldn't have been more supportive and generous and loving, but that never stopped me from feeling guilty. You also feel guilty when you hear someone else's story that is worse than yours, and so maybe you shouldn't be feeling so bad about what you are going through. And in case you thought there was nothing that could compound your feelings of guilt, there is. That guilt feels worse because everyone tells you how lucky you are compared with X. There's probably nothing worse than someone who doesn't have cancer telling you how lucky you are. Luck is when you win the lottery. See, O is for odds, not when you get breast cancer. There is no hierarchy of cancer by which you must abide, where you have to be upbeat and positive because there is someone who has a worse breast cancer than you. That logic might make sense in some detached, objective way, though in fact it is not true. You, the breast cancer patient, are neither detached nor objective. You are intimately attached to this disease, and everything about it is subjective. So permission granted to feel terrible about what you are going through and to not feel guilty in the slightest about any of it. Okay? Here are the facts about breast cancer. It is an insidious, wretched disease whose treatment can be worse than the disease itself. You did nothing wrong. You are not being punished for something you might have done in your current life, or your past lives for that matter. The truth is, we don't really know what causes breast cancer. Ultimately, there is one thing we do know. If you have breast cancer, you have some rogue cells that decided to do their own thing and play havoc with your body. And that is nothing to feel guilty about. And nothing is out of bounds, I think.
Well, I'm going to jump in since nobody else is, and I have a question. Let me follow my own advice and come to a microphone. I was just wondering about the format of the book and how you came to tell your story in this shape?
So I started writing just a little bit for myself for sort of cathartic therapy. And I had little things to say about a bunch of different things. I like to say that I represent the run-of-the-mill breast cancer patient. I didn't have a memoir in me because I'm a run-of-the-mill breast cancer patient. There was nothing particularly special about my breast cancer. So as I started writing mostly for myself and talking to other people who I shared some of these thoughts with, they were like, oh, you know, lots of people feel that way. You should really try and figure out a way to share that. So I came up with the organizing principle of an alphabet because I had a couple of essays that I'd written that fit nicely with that form. And they're short. They're very short, as you can tell. They're just a couple of pages each. And I didn't have to worry about, you know, people had always asked me, because I'm married to a professor who writes books, you know, well, when are you going to write a book? I was like, I don't have a book in me, you know, maybe a 2-page memo. But I have 26 2-page memos in this book. And you don't have to read it. You know, one of the things I found during my treatment is it really debilitates you. It's very hard to concentrate. So I wanted to make something that you could dip in and out of, that you didn't have to start from the beginning and go all the way through to the end and follow an arc. I just wanted it to be easily accessible and small enough to slip in your purse that you could take with you. So I wrote a few letters and we wrote up a proposal and went to try and find a publisher, and that's a very interesting experience. When you've written the proposal, you go up to meet with all these publishing houses and you're there with your agents, a bit like speed dating. You meet like 12 publishers in 2 days, and everywhere you go you have to be on to sort of sell this thing that you have. And you know, they really like the concept of the alphabet. And then of course I got a publisher, and then I realized, oh, I have to write 26 of them, because like the 10 I wrote for the proposal seemed to really make sense and I could do this. And then I got to X, and then I got to Z, and I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? But I'm really pleased with the format, and you know, from people who I've heard from already, who have gone through this and who've really appreciated A, the things I'm saying, and B, the format. It's not too taxing, and sometimes it's funny, and it has blank pages at the back for people to keep their own notes. So yeah, that's how it came about.
Hi. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2007 and then re-diagnosed in 2011, and I'm still fighting breast cancer, so a lot of things that are in that book are way, way too familiar to me. But one thing I was wondering, how you came up with the topics for each letter. I haven't read the book, but just looking at it, I know there's some other things that would come to my mind that would be, I think, helpful for people that are also going through this.
Well, some of it was, you know, I had very distinct things to say about some things. So M is for mastectomy, and I just sort of felt it was this clinical term that people talked about in polite conversation, and it's funny how the clinical term is now the term that we use, which is unlike most things in medicine. I actually thought a mastectomy was an incredibly, well, A, it's a really major surgery. It's an incredibly violent sort of response to what it is that you have, and that if people called it an amputation, that might better reflect at least how I felt about it. And nobody calls it an amputation even now. Nobody brings it up. So some letters were sort of easy to come up with for me because I had things to say about them, and others I just sort of racked my brains to think of what would be most useful. Some of them are a little bit unconventional. And I know everyone's alphabet is going to be different. So actually we started a Tumblr, a breastcanceralphabet.tumblr.com, for people to submit their own letters. Because everyone has a different reaction to what they're going through. So who knows, maybe we'll get together a dictionary eventually. This is just a breast cancer alphabet, not the breast cancer alphabet. And it's the ones that struck me. And there were, you know, letters that people sort of felt, you know, people thought that R would be for radiation. I didn't have radiation, so I didn't feel that I had something to say about that. But I hope that there's some relevance for people there's some experiences that are common to all of us going through it.
Hello.
Hi, Mary.
I had breast cancer before she had breast cancer, and I wanted to say what I thought you did with this book that I just want to note is you created the thing that I've tried to do sort of personally, which is you can only share your own experiences, right? You can't share someone else's experiences, but if you do it in a way where you don't get lost in yourself, which I think is hard, so I want to commend you for that, that those experiences become useful to others. And I think the most useful thing about this book is that you captured sort of the PTSD aspect of breast cancer extremely well, which is it's not so much the breast cancer, it's you didn't feel the need to elide over the things that are horrible. And that's what you get a lot of as you're walking through your days, are people trying to get you to not see the things that are horrible. And I think that was a great service. And I think you did it in many, many different ways in the book.
Well, thank you. You're welcome. And Mary is one of those people who, having visited Cancerland before me, as I say in that chapter, talking to other people who've gone through it is incredibly helpful and made many things so much more understandable for me and made me feel comfortable with the fact that I felt horrible and terrible and not in the slightest bit positive, but it was okay.
Sucks.
It does suck. And it was okay to be that way too. So, anyone else? Rick, you were poised. The wonderful thing about coming to a local neighborhood bookstore is your neighbors and friends are here too.
Having lived from a distance through this with you, I've always been struck by the grace with which you handle it, at least from my perspective.
Thank you.
Inside the house.
Hi, Belle.
Hi. It's been 4 years.
3 years, December 2010, so 3 and a bit.
How much does it remain, and do you think will it remain something you worry about every day?
Every day. It doesn't go away. So the letter A is for anxiety. There are sort of various levels of anxiety that you kind of have to deal with as you go through the course of it. But I mean, metastatic breast cancer is a real issue for many women, and I think that that's part of the story we don't hear a lot about in the breast cancer culture that has developed. So, and you know, there's no cure. They give you treatment to hopefully kill the cancer, the genes that the cancer that you have, but it could come back. There could be some errant microscopic cell that's running around your body. Every time something happens to you, if you have an ailment that most of the time is probably the onset of middle age, you start thinking about all those things that it could be. So vigilance is really necessary. And you just have to kind of calibrate the cancer. I know many people whose cancers have come back, which is sort of why I don't subscribe to the whole, martial sort of warrior, kick its ass culture, survivor culture, because it's always there. And if it comes back, that's not your failure. That doesn't mean that you did something wrong because you didn't kick its ass. It is a reality of the disease. So yeah, it's there all the time, and it actually never goes away.
How do you feel about the ongoing controversy about mammograms?
It's really hard. Since I'm not a doctor or even a science journalist, though I rely on my science journalist friends, I think that what this most recent study, what I've thought about this most recent study that says that essentially mammograms haven't made much of a difference in mortality rates, I don't think the mammogram is the problem. But, it's what you do with the information that is the issue. And I am one of those statistics that belies the statistics because I had no history in my family. I had an annual mammogram in my 40s, and I was in my 40s when I was diagnosed. So if I hadn't had a mammogram in my 40s, maybe I would have found it much later. So it's really complicated, and it changes all the time, which is really tough for patients. It's really tough to figure out what you should do. And I think one of the hardest challenges is that we expect of the medical profession, it's science, so it's either you can get a definitive yes or a definitive no. And sadly, it's mostly all in the middle. And that's not what we expect of science. And I think we rely on our doctors to be these sort of, miracle prognosticators. And they're really not. So I think you've got to figure out what's right for you. And I respect, in consultation with your doctor, I was very lucky to have every single one of the doctors I dealt with was fantastic. And I had a really good relationship with them, and I could ask them any question and they would answer. So I think that that's the important thing, that you understand as much as you can and make decisions that make sense for you. And I respect anyone's decision to, if they don't want to have an annual mammogram, that's great. And if you do, that's great too. Just do what's right for you. And it's going to change again in another 6 months because there'll be some other study that'll tell us something else. And that's going to be a constant. So it's a lot of conflicting information out there. The great thing is we live in the information age. The really bad thing is we live in the information age. Yes.
Unless we have one last question, which I think we would have time for. In that case, I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming. Round of applause.